Alan Quinlan, good morning to you. How are you?
Very good, Ger. And yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. You've been on the Jean Kleyn hype train for the last 6 months, it's fair to say. His booster-in-chief. The Ireland selectors weren't listening, but Rassie Rasmus obviously was. And lo and behold, he's part of South Africa's plans for the World Cup as it stands.
Yeah, it probably caught everybody by surprise, I suppose, when he was announced as the 41st player in the South African squad. Jack Nienaber, obviously, and Rassie Rasmus see an option of bringing him into the squad. I think Eben Etzebeth is still out injured, and probably if you look at the makeup of the South African second rows, it's hard to see Jean Kleyn being picked in the World Cup squad. But if you look at the rugby championship, they play Australia at home, New Zealand away, and then they're home to Argentina. It's a shortened rugby championship this year, obviously because of the World Cup in September. They see him as an option maybe, and they can add some value into the South African squad. So it's a strange one. I suppose he has played very, very well. I think he's still a bit tarnished. A little bit of it is unfair from what happened in 2019. I think he's a better player now. He's probably improved under the Munster coaching team this year and been unbelievably consistent in his performances. He's viewed differently, obviously, from the Irish second rows. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I think to criticise Andy Farrell or Paul O'Connell, as the forwards coach, and say they've missed a beat here is wrong, because they've proven the last number of years that they've done remarkably well with this Irish team. But he brings obviously something different, and it's a talking point, isn't it? And I'm pleased for Jean Kleyn. Obviously, the 3-year period. And the application for him has gone into World Rugby, and we're not sure yet what their answer will be, but I presume it will be that he's eligible to play for South Africa again.
Tough to blame Jean Kleyn himself as well, Quinny, when you consider the last cap came in the World Cup in 2019, so he's been sitting around waiting as well.
Yeah, and that game was against Samoa at the World Cup, and I think I saw some quotes this week about probably the criticism and the furore over him being selected ahead of Devon Toner. And look, at the time it was a big talking point. Joe Schmidt, obviously, Simon Easterby at the time, they saw something different in Jean Kleyn, that he could add value to the Irish squad. And look, obviously, Shane, his biggest strength is very obvious. He's a very, very physical player. He's 6'8", 121 or 2 kilos. Offers huge strength and power, but probably the way Ireland play and the short space of time maybe that he would have had now if he was brought into the Irish squad to adapt to that attacking style and that pace and tempo that the Irish team play with, it's probably too short a period of time. If he had been in and out of Irish squads, even if he wasn't playing in the last couple of seasons, I think it would have benefited him, and he would probably be in there. But it's I go back to what I said. It's hard to be critical of them, but for me personally, I would certainly be very interested to have him in around the Irish squad, because he obviously brings something different. And you've probably said this many times, Ger. Lots of people have said it. The physicality is probably one concern and one thing that we've spoken about in the last couple of years. Jean Kleyn isn't the answer to all of that, but I just think he brings something a little bit different. But going back to what I said about Andy Farrell, Paul O'Connell, what they've done with this Irish team has been superb. So it's hard to be critical and say this is a shocking decision or anything like that. It's not. But it's a great opportunity for Jean Kleyn. You said that, Shane, and it's a chance for him to experience training with international players again. And it's hopefully it doesn't come back to bite us and he doesn't end up playing against us in Paris.
So his Munster confirmed in 2022 that he'd signed a 2-year extension and would be with the province until at least June 2024. But that's probably going to be the end of that then, because he'll now be re-registered as a non-Irish player, and so that limits the number of players you can have in your squad who are non-Irish qualified, and it might tie up their hands a little bit when it comes to summer recruitment.
If they go and sign non-Irish qualified players for Munster, yes, it might. I think this one may be viewed a little bit differently. It depends. It's down to the RFU, really, isn't it? Because it's not a world rugby law that you can only have 3 non-Irish qualified players with the Irish province. It's an Irish RFU directive, and they've kind of stuck to their guns. It used to be 4. And 1 development player, so it's been reduced a little bit, and it's been beneficial for Ireland. I think there's been a lot of criticism, I think, by some of the provinces, particularly Ulster, when they had the scrum half. He's named the South African scrum half a number of years ago, and John Cooney signed for Ulster, and then he benefited really and got into the Irish squad. But look,
Ruan Pienaar.
Ruan Pienaar, sorry, when Ruan Pienaar left and that his contract was blocked, there's been 1 or 2 kind of high profile ones. But for Munster next year, they've Alex Nankerville is coming in the centre, and they've got RG Sneeman, obviously. So their quota is not full, but their squad is done for next year anyway. So it does depend, obviously, if they go the following season trying to recruit non-Irish qualified players, it may impact them, but again, we don't know. But maybe it'll be viewed differently if they do go looking for a number of players in that regard. But look, it's there's been a fair bit of stuff online. I've been reading it. Some people are kind of trumpeting that Jean Kleyn should be in the Irish squad. I don't think he's going to be in the World Cup squad either for South Africa, but what I do think may happen here is he may play 1 or 2 tests in the Rugby Championship for South Africa, maybe involved. If you look at the second rows they have, they've obviously got plenty of options. They're familiar players. Lou de Jager, Etzebeth, Marvin Ory's in there, Sneeman is back in. Peter Steph-Toy, who's obviously been playing in the back row for the last couple of years, and Franco Mostert. So they have a lot of quality there. There's 6 guys there who can play in the second row. And as I said, Etzebeth is still out injured. I'm not sure when he's due back. So whether Jean Kleyn gets capped here again by South Africa or plays, we're not really sure. But you said at the start, I've been trumpeting Jean Kleyn, Ger, and rightly so, I think, because I think if you look at the way he's improved his game, and I think probably where the other Irish second rows are more advanced with him, if we want to know why, I think the reason is the short period of time that he would have had to get up to speed with the way Ireland play, but also it's the skill set probably that the other players possess. Kieran Treadwell hasn't always been a starter for Ulster this year. He's in the squad ahead of him. Joe McCarthy is a very young player and maybe fits that type of profile of power and physicality that Andy Farrell has at his disposal, and he is a very, very good player, Joe McCarthy. So Ian Henderson is back in the squad as well. Tyke Byrne and James Ryan are the other second row. So it's not an area that we're blessed with huge depth, but you can't have it both ways. You can't have this guy sitting in the background, and if somebody gets injured, he then gets called up, and you can't blame him for taking this opportunity if South Africa give it to him. And I saw training pictures last night of him. He's training with the squad. He's there with them at the moment with the South Africans, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Ryan Baird, another of those options as well. Like it's one of those positions that's just blessed with talent. Quinny, like Jean Kleyn would add a lot to those talents, but as you say, probably getting up to speed with the way they play is one of the most important things.
Yeah, and obviously Ryan Baird, yes, but he's in as a back row kind of utility player, and that's similar to the Peter Steph-Toy role for South Africa. And I wonder, is there a little bit of mind games here and a little bit of an unsettling scenario from Jack Nienaber and Rassie, because that game in Paris in September is going to be a humdinger, really. But yeah, all the profile and the type of players that Ireland have are a little bit different.
Is that you mean give us the calls? Is that what it is? Here, come on in, tell us all the calls, tell us exactly what they're doing. You show us what the line-out moves are. What are the tells that you know about the Leinster and Ulster hookers who are in the squad?
But possibly. I don't know if Jean Kleyn will know the exact Irish line-out calls. And listen, I'm sure most teams, they change them pretty often anyway, and I'm sure that for this block of matches and build up to the World Cup, knowing Paul like I do, and his kind of attention to detail, he probably will change up the line-out calls a little bit. But yeah, it may be beneficial. But of course, R.G. Snyman is there as well, isn't he? Jason Jenkins was in with the South Africans in November. And that's probably a bit of an eye-opener. He hasn't played that well. I know he had an injury at the tail end of the season, but probably didn't do what Leo Cullen wanted him to do, particularly in that final. And he's not brought into the South African squad. But based on what we've seen and the consistency of Klein over the year, he's played 24 games this year, started all 24 games, 16 in the league itself. He missed rounds 3 and 7. And then 5 in the Champions Cup, and obviously 3 in the quarterfinal, semi-final, final for, the URC knockouts. And he's pretty tenacious and doesn't get injured a lot. I know he probably plays 60, 65 minutes for Munster a lot, but he's been brilliant. And look, it's good for the individual himself. It will certainly give him a little bit of a lift and a spring in his step. He's had a good few years there trudging with Munster and had a lot of disappointment, so I'm really pleased for him. And where it ends up and what happens, who knows, but he could very easily get capped here. You said it, Ger, the one worry, if this would come back, if Munster were to go and try and get a couple of non-Irish qualified players maybe for the 24-25 season onwards, because they're saying their quota is full for next year. There's still a little bit of talk about and whispers about maybe a front row edition, who knows, but that's the one area and situation that might affect that. And obviously if he plays for Springboks, will they try and get him back to one of their teams in South Africa after after this season? He's one more year contracted for Munster.
And like that'll be totally fair from their perspective as well. Just in terms of the whispers around somebody coming into the front row, like that's generally the area that people would have pointed to that is preventing them from being contenders to win the European Cup, right? That would have been one of the main areas that people talked about. Do they have a stronger case with the IRFU now having won the league, saying, well, look what we're doing already. We're very close to being proper contenders for a European Cup? Look, in very simple terms here, if you push the boat here and you got a kind of an open checkbook and you said, right, take this Munster squad and you can add 2 or 3 players to it, that is probably the one area that you would look at. It seems quite disrespectful to the players that are there, and you don't want to go down that road of questioning people and saying they're not good enough. I think what Munster want to try and get to is to try and have their players on the Irish team. When you have the likes of Porter and Furlong, Sheehan, Kelleher, Cian Healy, you have 5 or 6 guys there who are regulars with the national squad. Michael Alalato is obviously an international as well. So you probably have 6, 7 guys who are internationals. And that probably does make a difference. And it makes a difference in Europe. Even look what Rog has with La Rochelle, the depth he has there around that area. Most of the front rows nowadays are, going 50, 60 minutes because it's the tempo and the pace of the game has increased. We've seen a lot of the evidence in a lot of the competitions towards the end of the season that the ball and play time is a lot higher nowadays in the modern game, which is great for the game, because we had a period there probably 2 or 3 years ago where there was a lot of stop-start stuff. There was a trend of a lot of kicking. It's still an important part of the game, but
but there's so much movement in the game now. And for Munster, yeah, you would think that if you had that open checkbook, that it's not necessarily... I think the two positions would be hooker and tight head. If you had a choice of one player to bring in a top-class, world-class player there who not necessarily would, stunt the development and the growth of the likes of Dermot Byrne or stop Niall Scannell who's played over 20 times for Ireland and has been brilliant this year. Dermot Byrne has really improved his game as well. You have the tight head situation of Roman Salanoa, Keenan Knox. We haven't seen much of him. And you have to admit and say that, what Stephen Archer has done in the latter tail end of the season has really been remarkable. It's just been, he's been an unsung hero for Munster. But it's cropped up a couple of times this season where they've struggled probably in that area. And the one that jumps out the most is the Sharks game in the Champions Cup. So it's probably something that, if you want to get to that next level, you want your players. And I always said this, and it was probably one of our mottos when I played in my time, that the more players you get on the Irish team, the better you will be when you head into Europe. So obviously, current regular internationals. And Munster will have a few more, you would think now, and I think there's some good young players coming through. But Leinster are still the envy of everyone, 12, 13 guys in the Irish team, and that's kind of the standard where you want to get to. But John Ryan is coming back next year. He's done really well with the Chiefs in Super Rugby, so they'll have a spring in their step. But ultimately, Toulouse is another team. You've 6 international props there, and you've just taken the three of the front rows off, and 3 internationals are coming on. So we'll see, but I think that's probably to get to that next level in Europe, you need that sort of depth.
Okay, I do want to ask you about the story that's been reported widely at this stage that Johnny Sexton faces a ban. The letter that was served by the EPCR to Leinster and Sexton, I think includes a phrase, I might get this wrong, but it's about intimidatory language in the direction of the referee. So this, obviously there was a lot made in the aftermath of the game of the refereeing decision and the fact that words were exchanged. A potential for a 10-week ban in the build-up to the World Cup. Does this matter? Would it matter if he wasn't available for games, given it's going to be months and months and months since he played?
Look, it does matter. Of course it matters. It would matter more if he was going to miss crucial games in the World Cup. Obviously, nowadays, aside from all the cameras that were at the pitch, people with camera phones, all that kind of stuff, you've got to be careful. And we know Johnny is pretty passionate, and I think he was. I'm not sure, even looking back at the game, how he would be kind of. I was trying to think of what incidents in the game that he would have been so frustrated with
Jaco Piper,
with the referee Jaco Piper that day. Obviously, I think the week before, maybe in the Munster-Leinster game, there was probably 1 or 2 decisions that people questioned. I'm not saying it's right or wrong to have a go at a referee, but look, when you're not in the 23, it probably looks a little bit different. It doesn't look right, and people could clearly see Johnny going out onto the field and exchanging some sort of pleasantries with the coach, the refereeing officials, and his assistant referees. So look, it's not ideal, and I think I don't think Johnny has spoken on this yet, but I think if you did speak to him, he'd probably say he regrets it and that it was the heat of the moment stuff. So look, I hope Leinster and Johnny Sexton have got to respond to the EPCR. I'm sure he will get some sort of a rap on the knuckles for it, because it's something that we don't see in rugby. We don't want to see either. I've probably been involved in a few exchanges myself, but when the gear is on, you're seen in a little bit more of a sympathetic situation, that you're kind of, that adrenaline and all that stuff is up and you've played the match. So we don't know. We'll have to hear from Johnny Sexton himself when he speaks about it. I'm sure in the build up to the World Cup and those warm up games, he'll be asked a lot about it. But look, it's not ideal, and I hope that obviously from an Irish point of view that he doesn't. They don't come down too hard on him. They have to address it in some way. But again, we don't know what's said. The wording, as you said, from the referees, the referee was that his vocabulary was intimidating, and I'm sure he regrets that, and probably needs to be a bit more careful.
The hope is that they're not trying to make a point here, the EPCR, because they could apply tournament specific match bans that would not necessarily impact the warm-up games, which would be a worst case scenario, doomsday scenario. But hopefully they're not trying to make a point here with this.
Well, look, I think make it a point, Shane, is that if they find that the vocabulary was intimidating and disrespectful and not right, they very well will give some sort of a suspension. That is the hope, that it doesn't go as far as the World Cup. I think it would be harsh if that happened. I think it needs to be addressed, obviously, and something will come out of it. Unfortunately, I kind of know what the EPCR disciplinary process. I've been there a couple of times myself, and you're kind of guilty until you prove yourself innocent in that situation, which is deemed unfair. It's not the same in a court of law. You have to prove your innocence and mitigation, and if you wear a nice suit to the hearing nowadays, they say, well, you were very well presented and you were mannerly and all that. And we've seen lots of players getting their bans reduced. So look, hopefully it doesn't go and impact any of the games. But given Johnny's injury, given he's the captain of the side, the hope would be that he plays in those World Cup warm-ups in August. But there's a real chance now that he may miss one or two of those.
And sorry, do we need to see him play, do you think, or is it because we've seen Sexton recover from injury at different times? There have been times where his form has been slow to come back, and then there's other times where he's out for ages and it looks like he's never been away. So it's not nailed on that he comes back exactly the way he was, particularly at this stage of his career. But it's not a disaster, but at the same time, you kind of want to see him play, right?
Yeah, I think we've seen many times him coming back from being out for a period of time and hitting the ground running. We know he can do that. I think for himself and his own kind of match fitness, yes, you would want to get a couple of games under the belt, particularly for the Scotland-South Africa game. But he could very well use the Romanian game and the Tongan game to get him up to speed and ready for South Africa and Scotland. So, but again, hypothetical, we don't know what's going to happen. I don't think we need to see him play. I think for him and Ireland, obviously it's a better situation if he gets minutes under his belt. And, our fingers are crossed really, because I think he plays with his heart in his sleeve. He's very passionate. And look, Roger won't mind me saying it, I always compare the two temperaments very similar. Roger's had a few issues this year in the last season with coaches on the sideline and referees, and they fight for their team, and I admire that about him. But sometimes you've got to be careful, and Johnny's the same. He's pissed off after losing the game. He's seen stuff that he thinks Jaco Peyper missed or didn't give his team. But we always trumpet rugby and say how great it is for that respect towards referees. And I was actually thinking at the weekend, and if the Premier League soccer referees were mic'd up, some of the stuff you would hear from players and the abuse and the way they treat the referees is shocking, really. And that's one of the big things about rugby, that you don't get that, because you can hear the referee, you can hear him chatting to players, you can hear the referees who are calm and control and understand the game, that guys get emotional and they get hyped up and they can say things like if they feel that they're on their feet and it should have been their penalty, and they use a profanity or a bit of bad language towards the referee, it's taken in the right way, in the sense that the referee can say, look, calm down, and they kind of get a feel because they've played the game themselves and understand.
Yeah.
But you don't want referees kind of surrounded like it is in soccer, and I'm not saying Johnny did that, but what he did probably, he knows it was wrong, and it was there for everybody to see.
Okay, and we'll see exactly what their defence is, and I've no doubt the big gun lawyers will be wheeled out to make sure that whatever the ban is, it's the least possible one. Quinny, good stuff. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks a million.
Cheers, lads.
It's Alan Quinlan giving us some thoughts on the rugby situation at the moment.